Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to an exciting panel discussion with me. So, I have an exciting topic of discussion today, which speaks on delivering digital value in NBFC and the proliferation of neobanks, fintechs, and big tech in the digital economy of 2021. So, before we start with the introduction of the panel members that have joined us today, I just want to give everyone a heads up that the global pandemic has actually affected every vertical, regardless of the geography. And the BFSI industry is no different. So, while digitization is being talked about since a few years now, but it has become far from very compelling proposition only now within the world of turmoil, having to have connected and personalized customer experience being the need of the hour. So, owing to the strict lockdown protocols and social distancing norms, I'm pretty sure more customers would have adopted digital ways way from their banking to insurance needs to satisfying their NBFC needs as well. So, this panel will discuss the various pieces of digitization and digitization in their effective implementation. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel members that have joined in. I would like to start off with Ms. Neha Mogdal. She is a COO, Global Design Head and UX Mentor for TechWaith Consulting in India. I have Mr. Anandya Karmarkar. He is the Head Digital Transformation at Aditya Birla Capital. I have Mr. Sivakumar Nandipati. He is the Chief Digital Officer at FedFina. I have Subrata Das, the CIO of Ugrow Capital, Mr. Akshay Dhanak, the CIO of Magma FinCorp, Mr. Bala Chandal, the Chief Digital Officer at Ambit Finvest, Mr. Ashish Tiwari, the Head of Engineering at Neo Global. Warm good morning to all of our panel members, and thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us for this discussion. Great. So we'll kickstart the panel discussion with the proceedings, starting with Bala. So, Bala, a lot has been talked about when it comes to digitization and adopting digital on the whole. So, if you could just share your experience personally from the client experience being a key driver of the share of wallet. So, according to you, which investment, will have the strongest impact in the potential returns in the future from the NBFC perspective?
Hi, good morning to everyone. Good morning to the participants. Well, Marcus, my bet will be on CRM, customer relationship management software, leveraging digital technology for both pre-acquisition and post-acquisition customer life cycles. My reference is more, towards NBFCs because among BFSI, banks are early adopters of CRM and they have relatively longer evolution compared to NBFCs. Though CRM was meant to be for larger NBFCs, I'm seeing an increasing trend where growing and mid-sized NBFCs are no longer hesitant in investing in CRM. To give a reference, Ambit Finvest, we are a mid-sized growing NBFC. We have Salesforce as our CRM.
Right.
For effective usage of CRM, the internal users and the leadership team should make it as a single window for everyone to measure the NPS, Net Promoter Score, to strengthen the product market strategy, to run a customer connect program, internal campaigns, and etc.
Right.
Today, as a lender, I would like to have all my borrowers' details, especially who are infected with COVID, who are recovered from COVID, who are going through quarantine, and who have taken the vaccine dose 1, dose 2. So with all these details and with the other borrower, the financial details available in my CRM and core system, we would like to run predictive models on NCL, percentage of default, etc. NCL is basically a net credit loss, which is a term used in NBFC on the write-off amount. For example, if NBFC, if you are not able to recover from the money we have lent to the borrower for whatsoever, or for what, in fact, the reasons could be many. So the term is NCL, which is basically we write off that amount. It directly hits the P&L account. So using this, I would like to run a predictive model on NCL and percentage default, which is very critical at this point of time. So CRM, facilitates for us to capture these details, and with enterprise data warehouse, we can run predictive models. Hence, my bet is on CRM, which gives the maximum bang for the buck.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm sure the other panel members will also agree with me and with you as well, from the perspective of CRM being probably the new future when it comes to digital adoption in NBFC. I would like to bring in Neha and Siva over here to share, your opinions in the new digital paradigm. How do you evaluate customer behavior going forward from here? Neha, I would like to start with you on this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Marcus. Bala, that was interesting. While you mentioned CRM is a customer relationship management, which means that the customer has suddenly become the focus of everything, right? And why has he become the focus of everything? Because behaviors have changed over the last 2 years since we've got into the lockdown. These geographical boundaries that have stopped us from going anywhere has led to unprecedented shift in going to the virtual world. There's much more virtual traffic than we ever saw in the history of internet. So all of this is changing how the customer is behaving. It's changing how what the customer expects from a BFSI or any institute or any e-commerce or anything. His entire behavior has changed. The expectation has changed. We as brands have to ensure, or as providers of service or products have to ensure that we are meeting those expectations. I've seen some interesting data in the last 2 years. While the e-commerce is on the rise, and the e-commerce is on the rise because of convenience, because of variety, because of discounts, there are so many reasons. There are certain trends that I have observed in BFSI as well, especially in insurance. There's a large rise in the number of people, for example, taking telemedical now. They want to take a telemedical and get their insurance done. But is that here to stay is what we have to question. Is this a permanent shift in customer behavior? Is this going to tip off once the pandemic is over? Is something that we will all have to think. Because also data says while when the lockdown started, telemedical went up, but it started dipping down now. Why did it dip down? Because customer satisfaction was not there. The customer didn't feel satisfied, or the expectation of what I wanted from the service quality versus what I got was not matched. So while we are looking at changing in customer behavior, we have to question what's permanent and what's temporary. What do we take? What will it take for us to make it permanent if it is a valuable change for our business? Are things that we have to see. One very, very important shift I've seen in customer behavior is value-based purchase. He's no more doing a social status-based purchase. Because we've all a part of this, what's happening around us, the suffering that we've seen. People have started questioning, is it worth it? Is all this job worth it? Is all this money worth it? So people have become so oriented towards value-based purchase. What I buy should give me value, otherwise I'm not buying it. I mean, we've all been living in our pajamas for many years now. We've not bought anything, right? So we're probably buying night suits more than we bought our outdoor clothes. We're doing value-based purchases now. And that is something that we all need to be conscious of, that the consumer today is not flaunting and not purchasing because he wants it, but because he needs it, right? So I think these are things that we will have to look at, how to create meaningful propositions for our users and how to give him more value than he ever got. So that's, my take on how CX has changed and how we need to look at CX now.
Very, very well said, Nia. In fact, value-based and value being the center for the consumer on the whole. That's absolutely well taken. Siva, your opinion on this as well. So how do you actually evaluate your customer behavior on the whole?
Yeah. So taking from what Neha has said, I personally believe there are 3 ways we can evaluate the customers. One is direct, second is indirect, and third is sample-based approach. Direct, like most of you know, and Bala and Neha also has mentioned, NPS or CSAT, customer satisfaction score. These are some of the direct approaches which we can take and reach customers so that we get their inputs. Now, the second one, I'll not spend so much time because we all know about these NPS and CSAT. On the other side, on surveys is also another way, where we try to get the customers' behavior. All that I wanted to say on surveys was 4 things. We have to understand which surveys we have to ask for customer and what mode we ask, whether we ask on email mode, SMS mode, or who are the target group, and what are the few questions. Customer doesn't have time to answer most of the questions. So I say 4 rights as such: right service, right mode, right target group, and right questions. And that's how you can directly reach to customers. And ORM, like these are the ways where you go to customer. ORM, when I say online reputation management, be it on the Play Store reviews on the or the Twitters, where customers also come to us and try to inform us based on what has to be done or their wish list or something. So that's where we can understand customer ideas. And taking clues from ORM, I'll go towards the social listening, which is an indirect way of listening to customers. Indirect means in the sense like you make some posts, do some offers, you would understand what kind of people, how many follow, I mean, how many, what's the engagement metrics which were happening, be it likes or comments or shares. What does the customer encourage on the part of it which you do on the social portal? Those are that's another way of reading it. Having said that, we all have Google Analytics for our portals, where we get a lot of customer demographics, be it age or city, language, everything we get to know. And if we spend a detailed metrics or analysis on that, we get even understand the page level, entry exit points, journeys, events, times where he spends. All these, when you see together, you would understand the customer journey very well. So
Right.
how does he wants to navigate? What does he wants to do? All those. If I simply have to put, if we all know that data is the oil, right? So analytics should be a combustion engine. That's what I would say. If I have to reiterate, data is speaking. We should not be blind and deaf. We should actually listen to it. And apart from this, we have promotional offers, schemes. All this we can keep on running on A/B testing, and we would be able to evaluate our customer behavior. These are some of the modes which we try to evaluate customer behavior on the digital paradigm.
Very well said, Siva. In fact, I completely agree with your point. So moving on from the perspective of understanding the behavior to getting into what are the emerging technologies and what are the digital innovations in PFS and the whole. So I'd like to bring Akshay into the picture over here. Akshay, if you could share with us what are the emerging technologies and digital innovations that you've come across in this time of the pandemic that are actually disrupting the BFSI industry?
Absolutely. I think anytime we talk about the emerging technologies or the digital innovation, it is very critical that we understand what is the underlying base on which you are applying these tools, techniques, platforms, and methodologies in order to make the most out of it and make sure that these interventions are highly relevant. So I represent Magma, which is into the 33rd year of retail financing, covering the asset finance, housing finance, SME finance, and right now we are also getting into some 4 new products as well. Having said this, if you take a look at the last decade, we saw that the fundamentals have not changed. The business continues to focus on revenue, margin, differentiation, risk, and compliance. These form the 5 pillars of the lag indicators, if you will. If you take a look at the leading indicators, people will talk again more in terms of the 2 drivers which have come into play in last 1 year, which is risk and the productivity. And when I say productivity, I'm talking more in terms of organizations like ours who are engaging with customers more in the semi-urban and rural areas. While there is a fantastic penetration of the smartphones and the internet technologies and the telecom network over there, but you still are grappling with these 3 fundamental issues about basic literacy, the financial literacy, and third, digital literacy. So these 3 areas need to be worked upon. So we have a lot of case studies to talk about what we do in urban and some part of tier 3, tier 4 cities, but the larger Bharat is still untouched. That's an area which is very humbling fact that each one of us have to take seriously. Now coming back to the emerging technologies. Now, last decade has also seen a fundamental shift, as Neha also aptly mentioned about, the customer focus. That's why the phrase called, consumerization of IT was quite dominant in early 2010, 2011. That's when the investments moved into self-service portals, then the mobile applications, from the middleware technologies, service-oriented architecture, business process management, business analytical monitoring. Then you talk about CRM, data warehouse, and then, of course, encompassing each one of this is security. Come the middle of decade, the social and, the analytics and cloud came into a huge focus. And that is what served as the base, for us to now take a look at, how we can evolve forward. So there are, the 3 major areas that come into play. The first is, of course, we all talk about AI and ML, though it is a cliche. But especially in our case, machine learning is, really helping in terms of accelerating some of the feedback loop. So where the emerging tech has really helped, in terms of expediting the feedback loop, for the risk assessment. And by risk, I'm talking about credit risk, operations risk, as well as, the fraud risk. All these three levers that need to be managed fast and managed in time in order to make sure that we build a good quality book. Because at the end of the day, Bala also briefly alluded to this, but an NBFC defines itself by how it does the risk assessment and how it maintains the collection efficiency. These are the two things that really define, our bread and butter. If you get this piece right, then you will grow. If you don't get this piece right, you will get stagnant or wither away.
Absolutely.
Now, having said this, this is one area where the machine learning has definitely been delivering to the promise, wherein this feedback is coming in an accelerated way. We use a lot of reinforcement and supervised learning algorithms in terms of getting this equation right. But it's a journey. We have already kind of started with this, and it is showing some promise. The second part is multi-cloud. A lot of NBFCs like us, we believe in using the package solutions to have a quick time to market. At the same time, we realize that bulk of the offerings available right now with the new age partners are in software as a service mode. So
Correct.
You don't have a choice, but you will have a multi-cloud right from the get-go. It comes not just by a conscious design, but it's by the conscious decision that you take in terms of having that quick time to market. And that's one area where you have the on-prem setup. You'll have some of the homegrown solutions deployed onto the public cloud like AWS and Azure. So in our case, we have our entire the data layer, the data warehouse, as well as analytical applications deployed onto the Azure cloud. We have our transaction systems deployed on the AWS cloud, and then we have a lot of SaaS solutions in our portfolio. So multi-cloud is the setup. And that's one area which has again kind of shown a lot of promise, because the time to market has been pretty fast. At the same time, the cost structures are quite palatable, true to the value proposition of the cloud, but especially in SaaS. From a CIO perspective, I take a look at what is the cost per employee per month.
Absolutely.
And when the times are a little rough, then how do you bring about that non-linear change? That's the engagement you have, which is quite
Right.
purposeful with the chief executives in the group. That if their productivity is going down because of certain unfavorable times or the down cycle in the economy, then
Right.
how do you as IT also align to those imperatives? So I think that that cloud and multi-cloud especially is definitely coming as a good promising the next tech. The third and more critical one, which we will see as a disruption coming our way, is emergence of standards like Open. Or it's not a standard per se. There is a lot of discussion still going on. But Open Credit Enablement Network, there is a systematic shift in terms of moving away from the DSA-based outreach to more LSP-based outreach, wherein we take a look at cash flow-based lending rather than just taking a look at the credit score and otherwise. So it connects back
Right.
to the point that there's a huge potential and huge opportunity in the hinterland of the country, and that remains to be realized. And some of this collaborative effort like Open will come into play. But the technology that would really help realize that gain is APIs, right? So we have been talking about API economy. We have been talking about API monetization from past 5 to 6 years, but there are very few companies who have really been able to achieve that zenith. But having said this, now what was an aspiration will become a reality and will become a need in next 1.5 to 2 years time frame. So
Absolutely.
that entire API economy is going to be a real big thing, at least in the NBFC space.
In fact, I would like to, Anandya, if you could share, your views on the emerging technologies that you guys are implementing, or rather that you personally have seen in the BFSI space that's disrupting the industry right now.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, and I'm glad to be here. I want to, at the outset, thank Quantic India for giving me the opportunity to be here in the panel. So, Marcus, Akshay has really covered this very well, and I'll just add to what he said. So, AI, ML, and all these technologies are equally important, in fact, very important. A couple of them really stand out, in my view. AI really stands out at this point of time. Cloud stands out. But what I want to add is that the most significant disruption is not necessarily going to happen from any one technology.
Right.
And even a technology as broad as artificial intelligence is not going to play on its own. It will come from a combination of AI and cloud to begin with, and probably one or two more emerging technologies. And in my mind, those will be robotics and blockchain, having the highest impact. You can potentially have many technologies, but with AI and cloud, if you kind of add, I'm talking about financial services specifically here, and blockchain has a role to play. Although, the discussions right now are very nascent, But even if you take robotics, for example,
Right.
How they come together, and this phenomenon is being called the multiplier effect,
Right.
where not one technology, but a combination of technologies is actually going to have the disruption. So AI, so cloud computing basically provides the data storage and the processing power, which trains the new AI models, and in turns makes the cloud infrastructure a critical part of organizations. I think many financial organizations are now very actively moving their workloads to clouds. They are moving their developments to clouds, because if you have to use AI, then you have to basically be on the cloud. Potential list of interactions between these technologies is endless.
Right.
They'll continue to develop, and they will continue to mature and provide disruptions in the future. But I am primarily a business guy, and I kind of look at technology basically from a business point of view. And there are really some high impact use cases that most of the people today are working on, including ourselves. For example, how do you remove paper completely from the buying experience?
Right.
How do you remove not only paper, but every manual intervention that you have in the journey? And while the customer is in the digital journey, how do you intuitively figure out where you want to assist the customer in the buying process?
Correct.
How do you smartly bundle other financial products with the primary purchase that the customer has actually come to your platform to? Now, each of these questions can only be answered with a combination of different technologies. They cannot be answered just by one technology or on their own. And in the future, financial services will basically be a contextual product, as everyday objects. And as we know, this Internet of Everything is another big piece which is coming, which is going to drive a lot of data. And as objects start communicating with each other more and more, how can companies like ours, or any financial institution,
Right.
contextually plug in protection, investment, and lending products into those journeys? Because no one is going to come and buy a product to you. That world is gone. If you have a website out there where you basically want to put out a menu of your financial products, people are not going to come there. Footfalls are not happening there.
Right.
In fact, the largest footfalls are happening on some of the platforms which are today called super apps. Started in China. Paytm has become almost like a super app. Tata is talking about a big super app. Jio is talking about a super app. They're basically front doors where customers are coming in, and at the back end, you basically have relationships with partners, through the API technology, and you are giving the customers access to a huge amount of categories which customers want to purchase on a daily basis. And how do you plug in your products into those contexts basically becomes extremely important. So just half a minute more, Marcus, companies will have to therefore reassess their data strategy. That's the first important point.
Right.
The way it is captured, the way it is stored and made available on demand. Because if you are not able to do that, you will not be able to play in this world. Interestingly, while the digitally native companies do not have this problem, but most of the organizations today have silos. How do companies can break the silos, bring teams together, and empower them to actually work in this kind of an environment in a more agile way of working is something which is more of a cultural shift. It is going to take time. It is going to take many years, before companies are not structured that way today. And
Right.
and eventually, right, this will basically happen and come to fruition if companies are able to build very strong relationships in the ecosystem. So those are my 2 bits, Marcus.
Great, Anandya. Thank you so much. Subrata, very quickly before I move to Ashish, if you could share your views from the perspective of your experience with Ugro, as well as your own personal experience when it comes to emerging technologies on the whole.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Marcus. First of all, thanks for having me here, and it's an absolute pleasure to be part of this panel. So a little bit about us. So I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Ugro Capital. Ugro Capital is a BSE-listed small business lending fintech platform. Okay. So we are focused on addressing the capital needs of SMEs operating in selected sectors in India. Our mission is to solve the unsolved credit needs of the country. And we believe that it can be done best by one understanding the sector very deeply and combine that with the power of data and technology. So we are 3 years old in operations, and we operate with our patent filed set of statistical scorecards, and we have a homegrown platform which can produce a in principle loan decision in 60 minutes So within 3 years of commencement, and these 3 years have been 3 of the toughest years in recent history, for more reasons than one. But however, we have bounced back post COVID, and we have crossed 2,000 crore of disbursal of book standard 1,300 crores. We are live on 9 prime branches in 9 states, and we have opened 25 new branches of Grow Micro Business, where we are trying to go deeper into the geographies slated to go to 100 branches by the end of the year. With that being said, I'd like to share my thoughts and perspective about how I see the SME lending market. And the biggest thing that I understand is the expansion of the target segment. In many ways, Akshay alluded to it in a very clear way, actually. And when he said the larger part of Bharat remains untapped, in numbers, there are 6 crore SMEs in India, roughly 6 crore SMEs in India, contributing 30% of the country's GDP. 90% of them are not served by formal credit. Traditionally, SME lending has been done by banks, PSU banks, large banks, a few large NBFCs, who have relatively lower costs of capital, and they require the customer to give proper income documentation and a collateral. The large part of the customers who have these things are catered by PSU banks and banks and large NBFCs. The smaller businesses who do not have proper income documentation go to NBFCs. But NBFCs can serve them only at a higher cost of interest, primarily because their cost of capital is higher, and the fact that the risk is relatively higher. Ironically, so which means that the small business segment that is largely left out of the fold, or they are forced to borrow at very high rates. But ironically, this is the segment where the need of working capital is the highest. I think in current time, the biggest trend that I see coming is there's a lot of systemic push by a lot of incumbents to increase this envelope, to increase the target segment. And cash flow-based lending is an example of that. The data, which is very critical to understanding these customers, lie in the ecosystem in various bits and parts. They're not unified. But today, there are ways and means coming, and people are giving a lot of effort to make this, take this into fruition. For example, a Kirana store who has a POS machine, you can use that data to give him a loan. A small businessman in a tier 2 city who's selling on Amazon, you can look at that data and give him. There are restaurants on Zomato. There are B2B marketplaces. Most notably, the government e-marketplace initiative, the GEM initiative, where all the government departments have to place their procurement orders in a common platform, which is linked to 7 lenders in wave 1. We are one of them, along with the big name in the industry. GEM Sahay is live with Wipro today. We are started disbursing loans. This is how we are seeing that the target segment is really expanding, and this is where probably we'll get a better penetration into the untapped part of the country's population. The second thing is the change in country's behavior, and digitization has a big role to play here. But customer behavior is a very nuanced thing, and it is not just one thing. Anindya said this; it's just not one thing or two things, but it's a function of many things. One has to really understand how to apply these technologies to really create a smooth 100% paperless digital customer journey. But the real shift that I see from my perspective is customers are becoming more and more amenable. 3 years back when we started our operations, a businessman who's in his late 40s and running a business for the last 10 years, that person was used to coming to the banks with a scan of his bank statement and a scan of his paper. They were unwilling to produce an OTP to fetch a GST transaction report electronically. That is changing in the post-pandemic period, and we have moved to completely digital sourcing and a cash flow-based lending model. This is one of the changes we have done post-pandemic. 100% of our customers are giving a PDF bank statement and wherever applicable, a GST transaction report. I think this document submission becoming digital, the affinity of the customer to transact digitally, to sign digitally, this is a big trend. And I think this is going to continue because the future customers, who are the young generation of today's businessmen, the future customers, they will be completely clued on into digital and in the do-it-yourself mode. The role of intermediary will be curtailed. I think these are the things which are very important. And just 10 seconds more. And what will it result in creating the mechanisms of scale? To ride on these two trends, you will really create mechanisms, delivery mechanisms of scale, and that is where digitization will come into the picture.
Absolutely. In fact, very well said, Subrata. I would now like to bring, Ashish into a very, important point of conversation. So, we've seen disruptive fintechs and neobank models. So how, advanced will, customer experience be in the next 5 years going forward from here?
Thanks, Marcus, for the opportunity. See, one of the reasons that when you talk about fintech or neobanks, are they successful, is that they have much enhanced and personalized customer experience. And I believe that neobanks are able to do it as they have significantly leaner business models and best-in-class technologies. So if you see today itself, many neobanks have seamless account creation process, the basic banking functionalities like fund transfer, lock unlock, all of them have. Now, if you ask me, how do we see it down the line? I believe that there are going to be three major, changes, primarily to three areas. One, the new features. And what I mean by that is that if you have one single app, I think Anindya also covered it, that one single app, which is a super app, where you can have multiple accounts. You can have your savings account, you can have your wealth account, you can do a cross-border payment using the same account, using the same app, crypto, lending, FDRD. And all this comes along with a lot of personalized offers, depending on your income and expense cycle. So one change which will drastically happen is the feature set which customer is going to get on their app. The second one, which will be definitely going to enhance much more, like there are a lot of security features as of today, but I feel that more AL and ML based security features will be coming onto the app. Because the entire banking experience is a very critical, activity as compared to other apps. And the third one, which will change drastically, and we have seen it changing, is the customer service. Since being it very critical functionality, if the neobanks or fintechs have a round-the-clock customer service, and they are able to support the influx of customer queries based on the chatbots where no manual intervention is required. I believe those three areas, the feature set, the security factors of the application, and the customer service, these three are going to change drastically in the upcoming years.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, and very well said. Neha, what are your views on this? We'd like to bring you in to understand, what are your views on this entire thing of fintech and neobank models, and how will customer experience shape up in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So interesting discussion. While I was hearing Ashish, Akshay, and Anindya put their thoughts on the future and technology and AI, ML, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, cloud computing, I represent TechVed, and TechVed is primarily in customer experience. We drive customer experience, we fight for it. I was wondering if the man on the road even knows what's going on, right? We're dealing with somebody who's sitting in a small town in UP and probably can't even read the English site that you're creating. So I would say from a customer experience standpoint, we need to start going to the grassroots level. One side is this guy who's, like I said, is in a small town who doesn't understand what's written there. We need to start going vernacular for him. We need to start understanding him and delivering to him in the language and the content and the communication that he understands, instead of expecting him to start understanding what we're trying to tell him, right? De-jargonize, simplify, all of that is going to be the core. In fact, one little, I would want to tell you a little research finding that we had. We were doing this for an e-commerce site in a small town in UP. And, the guy was searching. So while he was searching, we observed he was writing, in UP, how instead of shoes, they say shooj. This is not to demean anybody, that's just cultural, right? So they say shooj. So he ended up typing SHUZ to look for shoes, right? And on Flipkart, he found no results, right? And then he went to Amazon and he showed me. He said, look, I typed SHUZ and I got results. And that for me is true customer experience, personalizing, right? And then it was very interesting when he turned around and told me, kya Flipkart use karne ke liye English seekhni padegi? That's true. I mean, do we expect the consumer to start understanding us, or do we understand our consumers and give it to him in the way he understands it, right? So going down to the grassroots level is going to be very, very important. The other thing that is going to be important is voice. Voice as a technology, as an interactive medium, is going to be immensely important, again, for the segments that we're dealing in, for the Bharat that we're dealing in. If you go even today to smaller towns, you will see that on a TV remote, they interact with voice instead of typing buttons.
Right.
Again, as a part of the research, we were looking at some people in small towns, and this guy had a lot of movies in his mobile phone, and I was wondering, where did he even download it? I said, आपने किधर से लिया ये सब movies अपने phone पे? The answer was so beautiful. He said, हम phone से बतियाते हैं और phone हमको सब कुछ दे देता है. So because he's talking to the phone, he's, in his local jargon, he batiya raha hai wo apne phone se. So these are things that we need to understand, while all of the technology will be the backbone of how we deliver this to him. But what are we delivering is going to be the crux of everything. And just, last 10 seconds, we're also dealing with, there's this term called Henry now. The millennials are now suddenly called Henry. High earning, not rich yet. That's what the acronym Henry is, right? He's earning high. He may not be rich, but he's got disposable income. He's going to be on your platform. He is your buyer, and he has an expectation because he's also on Instagram. Instagram super personalizes his expectation. Their offering is super personalized. He sees only feeds of his friends, only things he likes, only things he will buy. Then why do we, like, Anand very beautifully said, why do we show him a menu card on our website and say, these are all the services, please figure out what you like and buy it? That's not the expectation that he has. He has an expectation which is super personalized to what he understands and what he needs. So that's my take of the future. A very personalized offering in the language he understands, personalized for him, created for a persona that he is, using all of the technology that we have available in our hands.
In fact, very well said. In fact, I take that point from a voice and personalized customer experience being the future. Before we move on to the challenges, I want to bring Ashish back into a very important question, just to understand understanding the view from the top completely. What it was to what it will be. So, how do you actually see the role of digital tech in the banking landscape in the years ahead, Ashish?
Yeah, sure. So, when we say what it was to what it is, I would like to say it into two perspectives. One, from the bank's perspective, and the other one from the customer's perspective. See, what it was for banks is that they were, while they had a lot of, in terms of the institutional technology which they had, but they were not able to expand the range of offerings. Like when you go to a bank, they are able to offer you a savings account. But if you have to open a wealth account, then you have to go to a different premise, right? So that was very difficult for them to do cross-selling. Now, partnering with many digital platforms, all these banking institutions are able to enhance their standard offerings, and they are able to do cross-selling, on the same platform. The other, what it was, if you ask me, like if there's a bank in Delhi and they have to open an account for a customer in Chennai, it was very difficult for them to unlock these unserved markets. With all the new banks coming into picture, they are able to untap that market. So, and all this is definitely generating new revenue streams. So, and this is what is happening today. If you can imagine that there are thousands of accounts getting opened without a branch being there, so you can understand the type of revenue streams this is generated now. There is no single human intervention required when you come to new banks. From the customer's point of view, if you see, they used to have traditional banking services where you have to wait 2 to 3 days for opening an account. Now there is a lot of transparency in terms of opening an account. There is a seamless account opening experience. In terms of investments, profits, what you are getting out of it, interest rates. So the value props which comes along with newer banks is huge as compared as compared to what they were used to getting in the traditional bank.
Right.
The other point which I think they are covered rightfully is in terms of the millennials. So if you see their expectation today is more in terms of speed, the agility which any organization is bringing, and the customer experience which they are bringing on the table. In fact, when I was hearing to Neha, we have one of our products which is called as Neo Bharat product, and which is in 15 languages as of today. And this specifically is made in 15 languages because this is a salaried card for a blue-collar employee. So you understand that they will not be able to read English and write English, and that is completely controlled by voice. For example, if you click on the button, that when you click on the button, it will say that do this, aap paisa bharne ke liye ye karen. So those kind of things are already there, and many of these things will enhance. In terms of millennials, frankly speaking, what we have seen that they are ready to spend much more as compared to traditional bank if you give them a very good experience.
Understandable.
Right. So, and the last one which you asked, where it will go, I believe that India today has a lot of unbanked population, and that is a market which all the new banks will tap. So I believe that there is a great opportunity for new banks and fintechs.
All right, Ashish, thank you so much. Subrata, very quickly in 2.5 minutes, if you could share your views on what it is to where it was before I move on to the last question to Bala, Anindya, Akshay, and Siva.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And I'd say two things to that question. Where it is going to be fully digital, using cloud, using data, AI. I think I can't speak it better than what my the fellow panelists have said. I think two things I would highlight here. One, it is very important for the organization to choose which are the things to target, because all organizations are eventually governed by aspects of profitability. So you have to show profit, and if you're in the business of lending, then you have to manage the risk. So while we talked about Bharat and deeper penetration, we have to manage risk and profitability, otherwise business is not viable. So select which one we want to pick up. The second point is in the journey of digitization, and of course it can be very fancy for me to sit in Bombay and say I will fund a dairy farm in Kotputli, Rajasthan in 60 minutes completely digitally. Am I managing the risk? Or taking up a digital project to make this feasible is the right project to take up. So you have to have bang for the buck. So select the project which is economically viable. Select the project which can actually give a little bit of return in the short time, such that it can continue for a longer period of time. These two things, whoever will get the balance right in these two things are people who will make inroads. Covering the entire country fully penetrated is not be built in a day. So before fintech, there will be fintech plus fintouch. And before 100% digital, there's going to be 99% digital plus 1% physical. And one has to carefully understand what is that 1% physical. And that requires very sharp understanding of the ground level business and the ability to augment that with the most sophisticated tools that are available in our hands today. So I think that is where we will be. I think we will get there in 10 years, but before that, in the first year, we will do some of these things.
All right, Subrata, very well said. In fact, understanding of what it is to where we are going to be. But before we get there, we need to understand what are the critical challenges that we're going to face, right? So I think I would like to start off with Bala. Bala, if you could start off, by sharing, what are the critical challenges faced by digital technology leaders today in the BFSI scenario? If you could just share your bit on that as well.
Sure. With increasing digital connect and presence, and especially with the large population, working from home, the biggest challenge would be the data security. Because with this kind of environment which we all are working, the data security is exposed to the higher level of malware, hacking, and data leaks. We are trying to overcome with by implementing appropriate tools like VAPT, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing for all the applications. And we also try to bring in as much as firewall protection for all the websites, use single sign-on tools, and as well as two-factor authentication for all the internal applications, and also possible encryption for all the data leaks. My take is, even after the pandemic, data security and information security will remain as the challenge with or without pandemic, and it is the challenge. My guess is this challenge will remain at least for some time.
Right, Anindya, very quickly, if you could share, your bit on what are the challenges that digital leaders are going to face in the coming years, or probably currently that they're facing.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, so I think challenges we are facing almost on a daily basis.
Right.
There have been tectonic shifts in the environment, and we live in a very uncertain world today. As well as there are people who are actually also trying to spread some fear and uncertainty in the environment, and that also causes some problem to leaders. So cyber threats, as Bala mentioned, is definitely one of the challenges in my list as well. And I believe this is an extremely big risk. It's almost existential, or you can call it a catastrophic risk. Sometimes placed along with the environmental risks, or even the biological warfare. Sometimes that you talk about. These are really, really big risks in today's world, because things are getting connected. But I would want to actually say the number one in my mind, and sometimes people think that this is something to be dealt with a business or a marketing guy, is the shift in customer preference. Because if you think about digital leaders, okay, we have to manage the trifecta of a scope, budget, and time, but you have to do this in a dynamically shifting and rapidly shifting change in customer needs. And this is almost like getting stranded in the middle of an ocean without having any survival guide. That's really one of the key challenges that any digital leader faces today. The second one, I would say, maybe a couple of more, let me add. One is, of course, the whole, today you have to do things at scale, right? And when you start doing things at scale, systems and networks are getting more and more complex. And organizations do not really have the learning or sometimes the capability, right, of combining, the talents and the resources. And this kind of multiplies the challenges manyfold, right? It increases the cost of delivery and things like that. So people are not able to do things at scale. People in organizations are able to do things in bits and pieces. And the last one, I would say, is the obsolescence. Because on one side, while you are trying to implement, learn as an organization, right, you're trying to learn, trying to make the organization more digital. From the other end, obsolescence is also creeping in, right? And this is a non-stop threat. And it's a non-stop challenge that as you are learning new things, that is also getting obsolete. And obsolescence also in the terms of your knowledge. People talk about the half-life of knowledge. Today, I think, 2 years back, I used to hear the half-life of knowledge is 5 years. I think it is somewhere between 2 to 3 years today.
3 years today, correct.
Within 2 to 3 years, the knowledge is gone. It is shrinking faster and faster. And maybe down the line, it will be even faster. So how do you deal with these challenges as a digital leader in technology, in digital? Some of these things have to be really, and we don't have answers to all of them, but we do face these challenges. Like I said, it's like getting stranded in the middle of an ocean without any survival guide, because there is nothing that you can look back on and say that I have done this or someone has done this in the past, and I can actually draw some experience from there.
Absolutely. Siva, your view before I come to Akshay for the last words. Siva, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely clear. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So more or less, Bala and Anindya has covered it. I would add a few more points to that. Cultural shift as such is one I observe has changed a lot compared to what was before 2015 and what was after 2020. There are three huge events which has happened, be it one geo or demonetization or the pandemic COVID. A person at an age of say 35 years old at 2015, how he thinks, and a 40-year-old at 2020, how he thinks is entirely different. The cultural shock has come, and that has led for a huge digital transformation. On the other hand, when the data security or all these things challenges, the reason is without breaks, just imagine how far you can go or how faster you can go. So having these is relatively better, and handling them is also more important. And as we know that recently we call we are in the boom of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. If there is an index for these to measure over all of our population, I can steadily say that this keeps on increasing steadily. This keeps on growing very steadily. So it has to be managed well as well. And the last point which I wanted to mention was the customer retention factor, loyalty or the customer stickiness, which was in a decade back, it was the customers are more sticky, but now they are provided with enormous number of opportunities or multiple choices that they can pick from, and making the customer sticky to you. Even after for a long-term commitment of taking loan, the customer still goes for foreclosures, balance transfers, all these also happens. So that is a critical thing which has to be solved digitally, because that's the USP which you provide compared to other customers, and you have to be up and trending in all these aspects. With that, I'd like to conclude that.
Very well said, Siva. Akshay, I'm leaving the last words to you to share the challenges from a technology perspective. So, I leave the last words to you. If you could conclude from there on.
Sure. I mean, all the technologies go through their own hype cycle now. The hype cycles are becoming quite skewed right now. They're becoming spikes rather than the tapered cycle, so to speak. But if you take a look at the critical challenges that the industry is grappling with, and it will be kind of dealing with going forward. One is, when we talk about digitalization, essentially we are talking about B2B2C, be where the customer is, be relevant in the context in which the customer is, and then exercise all the controls in a very transparent way to smoothen out the journey. So that's an English statement. Behind the scenes, we are talking about hyper personalization, hyper localization, hyper agility, and what have you. And this is going to be an art. This is still going to be skills dependent. This is still going to evolve as a practice and drive the differentiation. But B2B2C is an area which is spawning a lot of challenges. One is in the area of security, which has been mentioned, that you can strengthen your security structure to the level of risk that you consider your organization has, and then be commensurate with it. But as you start tying up with your partners, and these are not just going to be partners in your industry itself, these are going to be partners across the industries. Their security structure, their security profile, despite being more advanced than yours, might be subjected to a different types of vulnerabilities, and those will percolate the boundaries. It's not that if and when, they will percolate. The question is whether we are prepared for that or not. And that's one of the reasons I see that B2B2C as a model is making sense. Many of the organizations have evolved, but from security perspective, they have not necessarily thought through pretty well, and they are still vulnerable. The second part is about the collaboration within the ecosystem. So a lot of us compete in the same kind of market, in the same type of an industry, if not in a B2B2C context in cross industry. But somewhere I clearly see the maturity level is yet to evolve, where we start collaborating, whether it is in terms of developing the unified negative list. Today, we all have heavy dependency on regulator to drive the collaboration between us.
Right.
And that's one area where there was a brief mention about blockchain. I personally had attempted to create a consortium, to get some of the industry-leading organizations to participate. But it was a humbling exercise, because we know that it is going to require a lot of engagement, a lot of maturity to get the industry players to collaborate and start sharing this intelligence. And I'm not just talking about security. I'm talking about a lot of fraud and risk that happen. And now I think we are living in a borderless world. So I think those issues have to be dealt with in a critical way. So yes, technology challenges will be there. I can talk about in the multi-cloud setup, monitoring still a challenge. The single pane of glass is still not there. The cost optimization is heavily skills dependent. We need to have specialists across the board, and you cannot afford all the specialists.
Right.
As the point was really made, when we want to scale, and I think that's what the name of the business is. It's still going to require a lot of artists to come on board and manage that scale at a level which is considered to be economic. So all those considerations are there. But I think this B2B2C related issues and larger collaboration within the industry, these are the two critical challenges I think we need to deal with.
All right. Thank you so much to all our panel members, for taking time out. We're 3 minutes overtime, but I think we've managed it pretty well considering 7 panel members. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was the panel for you, delivering digital value in NBFC and proliferation of neobanks, fintechs, and big tech in the digital economy 2021. All right, we'll sign off, and we'll see you shortly with an exciting presentation by Mr. Mohar V, CEO and co-founder of TechVed Consulting, understanding Bhasha, speak in your customer's language. All right, we'll see you shortly. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you, Montek, and all the organizers behind the scenes.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Take care.